Elon Musk just casually raised $86 billion for SpaceX. And that happened on a Tuesday.
Yeah, just a regular Tuesday.
Right. And then by Saturday, he turns around and buys an AI coding startup called Cursor for $60 billion.
It's just staggering.
It really is. Like, we are watching this real-time, incredibly high-stakes game of Monopoly. But it's a game where, 5 players have somehow accumulated almost all the cash on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just buying a house or, I don't know, a hotel, they're just buying entire city blocks at once.
That's actually a perfect way to put it.
But, it makes you wonder, what happens when one of those players lands on a geopolitical landmine? So if you're listening right now, pull up a chair. You are the third person in the room with us today for this deep dive.
Welcome.
Our mission today is to open up this massive stack of reporting, research, and data from The Economist, specifically their July 11th, 2026 edition. And we're going to use it to map out a global economy that is, frankly, actively snapping at the fault lines.
Yeah, the tectonic plates are definitely shifting.
Big time. We're going to look at why trillion-dollar AI mergers are completely reshaping Wall Street. We'll get into how a semiconductor war is literally breaking down the physical supply chains that you rely on every day.
And we'll also touch on why some really long-held assumptions about demographics, the workplace, and even like your winter heating bill are just flipping upside down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. I want to start at the absolute highest level of global power here. Just how money is pooling at the very top. I mean, I mentioned those SpaceX and Cursor numbers, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
really just a symptom of a much larger condition. I mean, we are fully entrenched in the era of the corporate Leviathan right now.
The corporate Leviathan, I like that.
Right. The sheer scale of capital concentration is fundamentally altering how business operates. Like,
Right.
to put some data behind your monopoly analogy, if we look at the M&A, the mergers and acquisitions landscape in 2026, deals worth over $10 billion.
Which is massive.
Totally. What we call mega mergers. They now account for a record 48% of total deal value.
Wait, almost half. Half of all M&A money is moving at blocks of 10 billion or more.
Exactly half.
Yeah.
That is just, it's difficult to even visualize. I mean, $10 billion used to be the GDP of a small nation.
Right.
Now it's just the minimum buy-in for a corporate tie-up.
And the venture capital world is completely mirroring this, this concentration. 61% of all VC funding this year is going into investment rounds that are larger than $1 billion.
Wow. Just raising $1 billion out of the gate.
Yeah. I mean, China has an AI lab called DeepSeek that just pulled in $7 billion in a single round.
$7 billion.
A single round.
Yeah.
So we really have to ask, what is enabling this environment? And it basically comes down to a confluence of 4 distinct macroeconomic drivers.
Okay, let's go through them.
So the first being just raw capital availability. Companies in America's S&P 500 index are currently hoarding about $2.2 trillion in cash.
Okay, wait. I have to stop you right there.
Because interest rates have been, relatively high compared to the 2010s.
Right, they have.
So if money's expensive to borrow, how on earth are corporations sitting on $2.2 trillion in cash? Shouldn't they be feeling the squeeze a bit more?
Well, you would think so, right? But corporate profits in America relative to GDP are actually near an all-time high.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of these massive firms, they locked in long-term debt when interest rates were at rock bottom a few years ago.
Oh, like during the pandemic.
Exactly. So now they are earning really high interest on their massive cash reserves while paying practically nothing on their old, cheap debt.
Oh, wow. That's quite the arbitrage.
It is. I mean, Alphabet alone casually mentioned they're selling $80 billion worth of stock, which for a company valued at $4.4 trillion is functionally a rounding error.
A rounding error of $80 billion. That's insane. So they have this impenetrable war chest.
They do.
But, cash alone doesn't force a company to just go on a massive buying spree.
Right. Which brings us to the second driver, which is the AI money fire hose.
Okay.
The 5 major hyperscalers, so that's Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and Oracle.
The big boys.
The big boys. They are locked in an existential arms race right now. They're actually projected to spend $800 billion in capital expenditure this year alone.
$800 billion. And just to be clear for everyone listening, capital expenditure, CapEx, that means physical things, right?
Yes.
We aren't talking about, paying software engineers or marketing. We are talking about concrete, steel, and silicon.
Exactly. We're talking about data centers the size of small towns.
Wow.
Specialized cooling systems, dedicated power substations, and literally millions of AI processors. They are building the physical infrastructure of a totally new technological era, and the cost of entry is astronomical.
So, okay, factor one is massive cash piles. Factor two is the AI infrastructure race. What's the third driver?
The third is a sudden global shift in political winds. The regulatory environment in America regarding big mergers has relaxed significantly.
Okay, so less antitrust pressure.
Exactly. And even more telling, the European Union has revised its own anti-monopoly guidelines to make corporate tie-ups easier.
Really?
Yeah.
Europe is usually so strict on that stuff.
They are, but European regulators are terrified that their fragmented, smaller industries will just be totally crushed by American and Chinese giants, so they are actively encouraging consolidation now.
Oh, that's a huge pivot.
It is, and you throw in massive protectionist subsidies like Taiwan's TSMC being handed billions to build chip plants in Arizona.
Right, the Cheech BS Act stuff.
Yeah. Or China's BYD getting heavily subsidized to build an electric vehicle factory in Hungary.
Yeah.
You basically have governments actively engineering massive, concentrated capital projects.
It almost feels like the 19th century railway boom, where governments basically said, look, we don't care how big your monopoly gets, just build the tracks.
That's a great historical parallel, and that leaves the fourth factor,
Which is
fear.
fear.
Pure, unadulterated uncertainty. The geopolitical landscape is incredibly volatile, supply chains are fragile, and technology is moving faster than boardrooms can even comprehend.
Right. Nobody wants to get left behind.
Exactly. In an environment like that, the prevailing wisdom is that scale equals safety.
Makes sense.
If you are a $50 billion company, you might get entirely wiped out by an AI pivot you didn't see coming. But if you are a $3 trillion company, you can afford to just buy your way out of any mistake.
You just buy the startup that figured it out.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense. But, here is where my head starts to spin a little bit. When a company gets that big, when we're talking about a valuation of $1, $2, or $3 trillion, the normal rules of business seem to just evaporate.
They absolutely do, and it fundamentally challenges all our assumptions about corporate governance.
How so?
Well, for decades, the dominant philosophy was the American-style model of shareholder capitalism. The idea that a company exists purely, solely, to maximize financial returns for its shareholders. It was basically seen as the end of history for corporate law.
Right, the ultimate final form of capitalism. The board answers to the shareholders, and the CEO answers to the board. Keep the stock price going up.
Exactly. But when The Economist analyzed the 16 companies globally that are currently worth over $1 trillion, they found that this shareholder-first model is actually fracturing.
We're sharing how?
The trillion-dollar club actually breaks down into 4 distinct tribes of governance, and how they operate dictates how the global economy moves.
Okay, let's break down these 4 tribes, because this completely reframes how I think about the brands we interact with every day. The first tribe is the one you just mentioned, right? The shareholder fundamentalists.
Yes, these are your classic ruthless profit maximizers.
Okay, who's in this club?
Apple, NVIDIA, Eli Lilly, Broadcom, Microsoft, Amazon, Micron. 7 of the $16 trillion firms fall into this category.
Wow, almost half.
Yeah, they do not have state owners, and for the most part, they aren't controlled by an omnipotent founder.
What about NVIDIA? Jensen Huang is pretty omnipotent there.
He's the face of it, sure, but he only owns a relatively small percentage of the actual company. Their singular mandate, legally and structurally, is to generate massive wealth for the people who hold their stock.
Which seems, totally straightforward until you realize that their pursuit of profit often puts them directly in the crosshairs of global geopolitics.
Oh, constantly.
Like Apple is deeply, deeply embedded in China's manufacturing ecosystem to keep their margins high.
Right.
But the U.S. government is actively trying to decouple from China. Or you look at Eli Lilly funneling intellectual property through Ireland to minimize their tax burdens. Their allegiance is to the balance sheet, not a flag.
Exactly, which is a really stark contrast to the second tribe, the corporate paternalists.
Paternalists, that sounds complicated.
It is. These companies operate on the underlying assumption that shareholders, quite frankly, don't really know what is best for them.
Like children.
Pretty much. They are controlled by founders or patriarchs who hold super voting shares, which gives them an iron grip on the company's direction regardless of what the broader market wants.
So Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway would be the classic example here, right?
A very benign example, yes. Shareholders gladly submit to Buffett's judgment because of his incredible track record.
Right, they trust them.
But then you look at Meta. Mark Zuckerberg has absolute voting control over that company. Institutional investors basically have to sit back in silence as he pours untold billions of dollars into virtual reality, the metaverse, smart glasses.
Which the market hated for a
I
while.
absolutely hated it. If a normal CEO burned that much cash on a highly speculative project while the core social media business was facing pressure, the board would fire them instantly.
But Zuckerberg is untouchable.
Completely untouchable.
And Google operates similarly, right?
Yeah.
With Larry Page and Sergey Brin holding super voting shares.
Yes, exactly.
But I also saw SK Hynix and Samsung on this list, the massive South Korean conglomerates. Do they function like that too?
Very much so. They are dominated by founding families, the cabals. And right now, because of their dominance in high bandwidth memory chips required for AI, they are generating so much profit that it's actually causing a massive socioeconomic panic in South Korea.
Wait, really? A panic over making too much money?
Yeah. Workers are threatening unprecedented strikes to get massive pieces of that profit, and politicians are actively debating how to aggressively tax or redistribute those gains to shore up the national economy.
Wow. Which bleeds perfectly into the third tribe, I think. Because these don't even look like traditional companies to me. The national champion.
Right. TSMC in Taiwan and Aramco in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Legally, sure, they have shareholders and they trade on public markets, but functionally, they are geopolitical entities disguised as corporations.
Size, that's a good word for it. To the leaders in Washington and Beijing, Taiwan is a semiconductor factory. And to the world at large, Saudi Arabia is an oil field.
These companies represent the totality of their home nation's strategic significance and, honestly, survival. They cannot make a business decision without weighing the national security implications.
Like, if TSMC decided that moving entirely out of Taiwan was the best move for shareholder value, the Taiwanese government would step in immediately. Because the physical presence of those factories is basically what keeps American warships patrolling the Taiwan Strait.
Exactly. It's an incredible high-stakes dynamic.
Which leaves the fourth and final tribe, the Hobbesian absolutists.
Yeah.
Let me guess. Elon Musk.
You guessed it, Tesla and SpaceX. This is a governance structure where individual shareholders basically surrender all their rights, all their expectations, and all traditional financial metrics to one man's singular vision.
Right.
Musk's stated goal for SpaceX isn't to increase the quarterly dividend. His stated goal is colonizing the planet Mars.
Which is just wild to hear in a corporate context.
Yeah.
And Wall Street's reaction to this is completely broken. There was a detail in the source material regarding Morgan Stanley that just blew my mind.
Oh, the research report.
Yes. So they released a research report on SpaceX. And in the report, they calculate that the company won't be free cash flow positive before the year 2035.
Right.
They state that SpaceX will require $84 billion of external capital every single year from 2027 to 2034 just to stay afloat.
It's an unbelievable burn rate.
Unbelievable. And then, at the very end of the report, Morgan Stanley concludes that the firm should be valued at twice what it currently is.
Yeah, it defies all traditional financial gravity.
Totally defies it.
But, this brings us to the really hidden risk of this era, this massive concentration of capital, these trillion-dollar valuations. It isn't just a stock market phenomenon. It is actively taking over the global debt markets, and that is where the real danger lies.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up.
Yeah.
Because I have a major bone to pick with this logic.
Okay, let's hear it.
We just established, 10 minutes ago, that these S&P 500 giants are sitting on $2.2 trillion in cash. They are wealthier than most sovereign nations. So why in the world are they suddenly going on a massive borrowing binge?
It's a great question. Because the physical infrastructure required to win the AI race is so impossibly expensive that even $2.2 trillion across the entire S&P isn't enough for the few companies actually building it.
Seriously.
Seriously.
Right.
We are witnessing an AI bond boom that is fundamentally reshaping corporate debt.
Wow. Because I saw the numbers. Meta, NVIDIA, and Oracle each just issued $25 billion in bonds.
Yep.
Alphabet actually went to the UK debt markets and issued a 100-year bond.
A century.
A century. I'll be dead, my kids will be dead, and some institution will still be holding Google debt.
It's true. We're projecting up to $400 billion in AI-related investment-grade bond issuance in America alone in 2026.
$400 billion.
Now, on the surface, this looks safe, right? The debt of a company like Microsoft is currently rated higher and considered safer than the sovereign debt of the United States government.
Which is terrifying in its own right, honestly.
It is. But underneath the Microsofts and the Alphabets, there is a massive surge in riskier junk bonds funding the secondary layer of the AI boom.
Right. Companies like QTS data centers or these new firms calling themselves neoclouds, like CoreWeave.
Exactly.
My understanding is they basically buy top-tier NVIDIA chips, build a massive data center, and then just rent out the computing power to other companies. And they are issuing billions in high-yield debt to do it.
You've got it. And here is where the mechanics of bond investing really clash with the reality of technology.
How so?
Well, bond investing is fundamentally a negative art.
A negative art.
Yeah, think about it. If you buy a stock, your potential upside is theoretically infinite. If the company cures cancer, your stock goes up 10,000%. You get rich. But if you buy a bond, your maximum upside is just getting your initial money back, plus the agreed-upon interest.
You can't double your money.
Right. You don't get rich, you just try not to lose. So bond investors are obsessed with stability and avoiding defaults.
But the AI space is, like, the exact opposite of stability.
Precisely. The technology is advancing at such a blistering pace that a company holding all the cards today could be entirely obsolete in 3 years.
Wow.
So if you are an institutional investor buying a 30-year bond from a data center company, you have to predict whether their specific technological architecture will still be relevant in 2056.
Which is impossible to know.
Completely impossible. If a new type of chip comes out next year that requires a totally different cooling system, that massive data center might become a stranded asset. They go bankrupt and they default on the bond.
Okay, so to bring this down to earth for a second, why should the listener care? Let's say you're listening to this on your commute, you don't own a single individual stock, you definitely don't buy corporate bonds. Why does it matter to you that CoreWeave or Meta is issuing billions in debt?
Because of concentration risk.
Okay, unpack that.
The top decile of listed firms, the top 10%, now accounts for over 3/4 of the total market capitalization in America.
That's incredibly top-heavy.
It is. The index funds that make up your 401k, the pension fund that pays your retired parents, the mutual funds holding your savings, they are all overwhelmingly exposed to these specific companies.
Oh, see.
So if just one of these debt-laden giants makes the wrong multi-billion-dollar bet on AI architecture and stumbles, it won't just be an isolated corporate bankruptcy.
It takes the whole market down with it.
The reverberations will rupture the entire financial system. Your retirement is intrinsically tied to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk successfully navigating the most volatile technological shift in human history.
Well, that is a deeply uncomfortable thought. We've basically built a massive, top-heavy tower, and we're just standing at the bottom hoping the wind doesn't blow too hard.
That's the reality of it.
Okay, I want to shift our focus a bit.
Yep.
Across the Pacific.
Let's do it.
Because while America is relying on these private corporate Leviathans and, frankly, wild debt markets to fund the AI revolution, the other global superpower, China, is taking a vastly different approach.
A completely divergent philosophy, yeah.
Right. And I have a hard time buying that a purely state-directed, red tape-heavy system can out-innovate the cutthroat free market.
But the data from The Economist suggests they're making serious ground.
They absolutely are. In China, the state is essentially stepping in to replace cautious private venture capital. They're engineering a massive state-directed push to achieve total self-sufficiency in frontier technologies.
And it's incredibly overt, isn't it? I mean, you rarely see Western heads of state acting like hype men for specific startups.
The Chinese premier Li Chang was recently, actively promoting a robotics firm called Unitree. He was publicly highlighting how their valuation exploded from 10 million yuan to 42 billion yuan in a single decade.
Yeah, the signaling is very intentional.
And Unitree got its IPO approved in 100 days. In a normal regulatory environment, that process takes over a year, sometimes 2 years.
Right. The government is essentially clearing the runway. They are removing all friction for companies they deem critical to the state.
Because the capital requirements are just so enormous.
Exactly. China estimates they need trillions of yuan over the next decade just for AI data centers and humanoid robotics. And to meet that, state-owned entities have become the ultimate venture capitalists.
Like who?
Take SMIC, China's massive state-owned semiconductor foundry. They operate an investment fund that currently holds equity stakes in over 400 different domestic semiconductor firms.
400. That's an entire ecosystem controlled by one state entity.
It is. Even when private tech giants like Xiaomi want to invest in a startup, they are frequently teaming up with local municipal governments to form joint investment funds. The lines between private enterprise and state industrial policy have just been completely erased.
I can see how that looks incredibly powerful on paper. I mean, if I'm a founder working on next-generation battery tech, having a giant fire hose of government money attached to a regulatory fast track sounds like an absolute dream. It solves all my funding bottlenecks instantly.
It does.
But there has to be a catch.
Oh, there's a massive catch.
Okay, what is it?
State money comes with incredibly thick, heavy strings attached. Capital in China must flow into companies and sectors that specifically align with the Communist Party's 5-year technological plans. It forces money into safe, government-approved hardware sectors.
Which fundamentally alters how innovation actually happens.
Exactly.
Like if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, the biggest leaps, personal computers, the internet, social media, were driven by renegades building things the government didn't even understand, let alone approve of.
Right.
So if a Chinese bank-backed investment firm will only fund your startup if you already have a stamp of government recognition, you lose that disruptive left-field innovation entirely. Furthermore, Chinese regulators are basically reserving the privilege of going public on the stock market almost exclusively for top-tier hardware manufacturers, or firms actively helping the country break its reliance on foreign technology.
Wow, so consumer apps are just out of luck.
Pretty much. And this heavy-handed approach is severely distorting the broader Chinese market. You have hundreds of millions of retail investors in China listening to these government pronouncements, and they are moving in a herd.
Right.
They are blindly chasing tech stocks, which are up 20%, while aggressively yanking their money out of boring, everyday consumer staple companies, which are down 15%.
That sounds like a bubble. Private professional investors are getting incredibly nervous because capital isn't being allocated based on market efficiency or consumer demand or genuine profitability. It's being allocated based on centralized policy dictates.
Which brings us to the ultimate crucible for this state-directed model, the global semiconductor race.
Yes, compute, meaning the physical processors and memory chips required to train AI models. It is the new currency of global power.
Absolutely. I was looking at the coverage of the recent Computex trade show in Taipei. It's the biggest hardware show in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And the absolute elephant in the room was China's chip makers. They physically were not there due to geopolitical tensions, but their shadow loomed over every single keynote and product launch.
Everyone was talking about them.
Everyone. Because despite the sweeping export controls imposed by the United States, China is catching up.
The irony of those U.S. export restrictions is that they essentially handed Chinese technology firms a massive, highly protected domestic market. Well, companies like Alibaba, Baidu, and startups like DeepSeek are thriving right now because domestic chip designers are capturing 80% of China's internal AI chip spending.
Oh, because they literally can't buy from the outside.
Right. Before the bans, they would have just bought NVIDIA chips like everyone else. It was easier. Now they're forced to buy domestic.
Wait. They can't get the absolute best hardware. The U.S. blocked them from buying NVIDIA's top-tier H100 and B200 chips.
You're right.
So if they're working with inferior silicon, how are they training AI models that are rivaling Western labs?
By using incredible ingenuity in chip design to compensate for the manufacturing gap, they are utilizing brute force architecture and incredibly clever software.
Give me an example.
Take Huawei. They built a system called Cloud Matrix. Because one of their domestic Ascend processors isn't nearly as fast as an NVIDIA chip, Huawei physically links 384 of these Ascend processors together to operate as a single massive brain to challenge NVIDIA's systems.
Whoa. It's like, imagine you want to enter the Formula One circuit, but you are legally banned from buying a Ferrari or a Mercedes engine.
Okay, yeah.
So instead, you go and buy 4 standard Honda Civic engines.
Right.
You hotwire them together, you strap them to the same chassis, and then you write impossibly complex software to make all 4 engines fire and run in absolute perfect synchronization so the car doesn't just tear itself apart on the track.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the software challenge. Because NVIDIA's real moat isn't just their chips, it's their software platform, CUDA, which developers use to talk to the chips.
Right, the ecosystem lock-in.
Exactly. So Huawei is aggressively developing their own platform called CAN to compete with CUD, making it really frictionless for Chinese developers to switch over. But I'd actually take your engine analogy a step further.
Oh.
DeepSeek, the AI lab, is managing to train massive models on weaker chips by using lower precision data formats, specifically something called FP8.
Wait, lower precision. Usually in computing, we want things to be as precise as mathematically possible, right?
Yeah.
Why would an AI company intentionally use lower precision?
It basically comes down to how neural networks actually learn. Traditional computing requires absolute precision. If you calculate a bank transfer, it needs to be accurate to the exact penny.
Of course.
That requires 32-bit or 64-bit floating point math, which takes up a lot of memory and processing power. But an AI trying to recognize a picture of a cat or predict the next word in a sentence doesn't need to know the exact mathematical value of a pixel to 10 decimal places.
It just needs the general vibe.
Exactly. It just needs a rough probability. So FP8, which stands for 8-bit floating point, uses vastly less memory and bandwidth. By optimizing their algorithms to tolerate good enough math, Chinese labs can train cutting-edge models on older, less powerful hardware.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Really incredibly clever.
Cool.
And this is the massive roadblock. Designing the chip architecture and writing the softwares is only half the battle.
Yeah.
You still have to physically manufacture the silicon. You have to print billions of microscopic transistors onto a wafer. And that is where the Honda Civic analogy kind of hits a brick wall.
Yes. The manufacturing bottleneck is severe, and it is rooted in pure physics and optics.
Right.
To manufacture the fastest, smallest processors in the world, you require extreme ultraviolet or EUV lithography machines.
EUV.
Yes. These machines use light with a wavelength of just 13.5 nanometers to literally draw circuits on silicon. And the only company on the planet that makes these machines is ASML in the Netherlands.
And thanks to U.S. pressure, ASML is legally banned from selling them to China.
Completely banned.
And what is China's physical workaround? I assume they're trying to reverse engineer or build their own EUV machines.
They are trying, but most industry estimates suggest China is at least a decade away from a functional, homegrown EUV machine.
A decade. That's an eternity in tech.
It is.
Yeah.
The optics require mirrors so perfectly smooth that if they were scaled to the size of the Earth, the highest mountain would be less than a millimeter tall.
That is staggering engineering.
It is. So in the meantime, Chinese foundries are forced to use older, deep ultraviolet or DUV machines.
But DUV machines use a wider wavelength of light.
Right.
It's like trying to draw a highly detailed architectural blueprint using a thick Sharpie marker instead of a fine-tip pen. You literally can't draw the lines close enough together without them blurring.
That's exactly it. So to get smaller circuits using older machines, Chinese foundries use a technique called multi-patterning.
What's that?
They take the silicon wafer, apply a chemical photoresist, expose it to the DUV light through a stencil to draw part of the circuit, etch it, and then they do it again.
Oh, no.
And again, sometimes 4 or more passes for a single layer of the chip.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. Every time you remove the wafer and put it back in, you have to align it flawlessly.
Flawlessly.
If you are off by a few nanometers on the third pass, the lines cross, the circuit shorts, and the entire chip is garbage.
It is incredibly slow, it burns vastly more energy, and it geometrically increases the chance of microscopic defects.
Ah.
The yield rates, the percentage of working chips on a single wafer, are much, much lower.
Yet, despite all of this friction, their progress is real enough to actually shake global supply chains. There's a detail in the reporting that I just couldn't believe.
The Apple detail.
Yes. Apple is currently seeking permission from the U.S. government to buy older generation memory chips from a Chinese company called CXMT to use in their devices.
Yep.
If that gets approved, an American tech giant will essentially be bankrolling the very Chinese semiconductor industry the U.S. government has spent billions trying to contain.
It perfectly illustrates the inescapable entanglement of these global systems. You cannot easily isolate a technological ecosystem no matter how many export controls you write.
No, you really can't, which transitions us perfectly, I think.
Okay.
We've been talking about algorithms, trillion-dollar valuations, and microscopic lasers. It can all feel very, abstract.
Very high level.
Right. But this digital ambition requires physical hardware. It requires physical energy. And right now, the physical supply chains that support our normal daily lives are breaking down under the strain of this AI race.
We are witnessing a collision with reality. The virtual world is demanding more than the physical world can extract, process, and ship.
Let's look at a highly unexpected casualty of this AI boom: video games.
Ah, yes.
Specifically, Microsoft's Xbox division. Because this shows how a tech race in Silicon Valley ruins a teenager's weekend in Ohio.
The Xbox situation is such a fascinating microcosm of a broken supply chain. Recently, Microsoft brought in Asha Sharma, who formerly ran the grocery delivery app Instacart.
Wait, Instacart.
Yeah,
Okay.
Instacart, that they brought her in to act as the Miss Fix-It for Xbox.
The Instacart executive taking over a legacy gaming console.
Right, but she walked in, took one look at the books, declared the gaming arm not healthy, and immediately initiated 3,200 layoffs.
Wow. Brutal. Now, to be fair, part of this is due to Microsoft's own strategic misfires, right?
Sure, they bet the house on their Game Pass subscription service, hoping it would become the Netflix of gaming.
Which didn't quite pan out.
No, they targeted 77 million members, but growth completely stalled out at fewer than 30 million.
But the internal strategy is only half the story here.
Exactly. The external shock is where it connects to our broader theme. When Sharma took over, the AI demand for high-bandwidth memory chips had already sent consumer electronics supply chains into a severe crisis.
Right, because the AI Leviathans are just buying up all the components.
They are absorbing the manufacturing capacity of the entire planet to build those $800 billion data centers we talked about earlier.
So the gaming consoles are left fighting for scraps.
Yes. Within Asha Sharma's first 50 days on the job, the input costs for building a single physical Xbox console rose by 50%.
50% in 50 days. That's unheard of in hardware.
The component crunch is severe across the board. All three major console makers, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, have been forced to increase the retail prices of their hardware at a time when industry growth is already sluggish and consumers are feeling inflation fatigue.
And the real-world impact of this is huge. Take the highly anticipated game, Grand Theft Auto 6.
Oh, people are waiting for that one.
They are. It has been in development for a decade, and it's rumored to have cost $2 billion to make.
Wow.
But because of this supply chain chaos, analysts are legitimately worried that Microsoft and Sony might not be able to manufacture enough physical consoles for players to actually play the game on when it launches.
Which hurts game sales.
Massively. Sony is even saying they will stop selling physical game discs entirely by 2028, just to offset the rising costs of the disk drives and the internal hardware.
It is the ultimate butterfly effect.
It really is.
A generative AI model needs more parameters, so a data center buys up memory allocation from a foundry in Taiwan, which means a factory in Mexico can't finish an Xbox, which means a consumer in Chicago can't play a game.
It's all connected.
But if we transition from the physical chips that run our devices to the physical energy that powers our nations, the supply chain crunch becomes exponentially more precarious.
You're talking about the global liquefied natural gas, or LNG,
Yes.
crisis.
Yeah.
This story from the reporting is straight out of a geopolitical thriller.
It really is.
On June 28th, an LNG tanker named the Leviathan leaves a port in Texas. It is fully loaded with natural gas, headed for France.
Routine shipment.
Right. But literally mid-ocean, in the middle of the Atlantic, this ship does a massive U-turn.
A literal U-turn.
Total Energies, the company chartering the gas, got a much better financial offer from a buyer in Asia, so they just rerouted the ship to the other side of the world, leaving Europe hanging.
And this is happening with increasing frequency. To understand why, we have to look at how the LNG market actually functions.
Okay, break it down for us.
Unlike pipeline gas, which is locked into long-term geographic contracts, you build a pipe, gas goes from point A to point B.
Right.
LNG is traded on a global spot market. The gas is chilled to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, which shrinks its volume 600 times, loaded onto specialized thermoships, and sent to whoever pays the highest price that day.
It's a free-for-all.
Right now, buyers in Asia are actively outbidding Europeans for American gas cargoes, and tankers are being diverted in record numbers.
And to understand why the market is suddenly so tight and prone to these crazy bidding wars, we have to look at the geopolitical map. And just to be clear to the listener, we are looking at this strictly as factual background from the source material to explain market drivers. We're not taking sides here.
Right, purely as factual market context. The primary catalyst is the war in Iran and the subsequent closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical maritime choke points in the entire world.
It is. According to the data, its closure has effectively knocked out a fifth of all global LNG flows. It has also taken 17% of Qatar's massive export capacity entirely offline, trapping that gas in the Persian Gulf.
And the reporting also notes that in July 2026, the U.S. administration, under President Trump, revoked a waiver that had previously allowed Iranian oil sales and initiated strikes on Iran in retaliation for attacks on commercial tankers.
Yes.
The result of all this is just a complete bottleneck in global energy transit.
And those disruptions are creating a terrifying, truly exponential threat matrix for Europe as we approach this coming winter.
We'll talk about winter.
Right now, European gas storage facilities are only 47% full.
That sounds low.
That is the lowest level recorded in 15 years at this specific point in the summer injection season.
So if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, what is the actual risk? I mean, how does this affect the average person living in Europe or even here?
If you combine the loss of Qatari supply with other highly probable localized shocks, the math breaks down rapidly. Take extreme weather, for example.
Okay.
We are currently seeing Asian El Niño heat waves dramatically boosting the demand for air conditioning, which draws even more LNG tankers away from Europe toward China and Japan.
Because they needed to run the power plants.
Exactly. And in Europe itself, infrastructure is incredibly brittle. A prolonged dry spell can drain hydropower reservoirs in Switzerland.
Oh, I didn't even think about hydro.
Or a warm summer heats up the rivers in France, forcing them to throttle back their nuclear reactors because the river water is too warm to safely cool the reactor cores.
We really? The river water gets too hot to cool the nuclear plant.
It happens all the time, and if that happens, Europe has to burn even more gas to generate electricity, draining their storage even faster.
It's a cascading failure.
Precisely. If 2 or 3 of these seemingly disconnected events occur simultaneously, a strike at an Australian LNG terminal, a heat wave in Shanghai, and a closed Strait of Hormuz, the global market is so tight that prices will just go exponential.
Now, Europe is generally wealthy. They won't literally freeze in the dark. They will just outbid poorer nations in South Asia for whatever gas is available.
Right.
But that financial cost rolls downhill. If natural gas prices quadruple, the cost to run an industrial bakery in Germany quadruples.
The cost of fertilizer skyrockets.
Exactly. That downstream inflation hits the listener's grocery bill directly, regardless of where they live. We are entirely dependent on highly specialized ships moving physical gas through narrow, contested straits, and one spark can just ignite massive global inflation.
It really is a precarious balance.
It is. This brings us to a crucial pivot in our deep dive today. We've spent a lot of time talking about physical infrastructure, silicon, shipping lanes, data centers.
The hardware of the world.
Right. Now we need to look at human infrastructure, the policies and demographic shifts that power our societies. Because here, too, the old maps are completely useless.
We are seeing profound reversals in global policy and workplace trends that have held steady for decades.
Let's start with global policy. The most glaring example is happening right now at the World Bank.
Yes, and this is a fascinating philosophical clash over what the word development actually means. And again, neutrally reporting the source material here.
Back in 2023, the World Bank president, Ajay Banga, pushed a massive, highly publicized green initiative. The official target was to reserve 45% of all World Bank lending explicitly for climate change projects.
To put that into context, that meant billions of dollars earmarked specifically for funding wind turbines in developing nations or planting massive mangrove forests along coastlines to prevent storm surge flooding.
Right, and the argument, heavily backed by European nations and environmental NGOs, was that climate change is an existential threat to the developing world.
If a country's underwater, it doesn't matter how many schools you build. Therefore, green infrastructure is development.
But now, in 2026, that 45% target has been entirely scrapped.
It has, completely scrapped. And the reversal was driven by a fierce internal pushback, heavily supported by the U.S. Treasury under Secretary Scott Bessent.
What's the counter-argument?
The counter-argument is that ring-fencing almost half of the World Bank's capital for long-term climate projects actively diverts critical, immediate funds away from dire poverty relief.
It's a brutal triage. The argument is, how can you justify spending $50 million planting trees to lower global temperatures by a fraction of a degree in 50 years, when that same $50 million could build rural health clinics, vaccinate children, and pave roads to get crops to market today?
It is a profound debate over the hierarchy of human needs.
It really is.
And the immediate outcome is that the climate targets have been dissolved. The needle of global development aid is swinging aggressively back toward traditional poverty alleviation and immediate economic growth, prioritizing human welfare today over environmental mitigation tomorrow.
And that isn't the only area where a decade-long trend is suddenly shifting into reverse. We need to talk about the workplace.
This is a big one.
Specifically, the data showing that the lean-in generation of women is suddenly and rapidly leaning out.
The statistics here are quite jarring. After nearly 20 years of uninterrupted steady growth, Women's progress in corporate leadership has hit a wall and is actually beginning to slide backward.
Yeah, in 2025, women's share of newly appointed board seats in the S&P 500 dropped down to 38%.
We saw highly publicized successions where prominent female frontrunners to be the next CEO of JP Morgan abruptly bowed out.
And Goldman Sachs promoted a notably smaller percentage of female partners this cycle.
But it's not just the C-suite. The labor force participation rate for university-educated American women with young families has fallen consecutively every single year since 2023.
My initial thought when I read this was that it must be a lingering hangover from the pandemic.
Yeah.
Schools closed, childcare collapsed, and mothers took the brunt of it. Are we just still recovering from that shock?
Economists are looking really closely at this, and the consensus is that it is much deeper and more structural than a pandemic hangover. Consider this. The gender pay gap actually widened in 2023 and 2024.
Wait, it got worse.
It got worse. That is the first time we have seen back-to-back widening in 60 years.
60 years. So what is the root cause here?
There are two primary structural drivers. First is a catastrophic, ongoing childcare crisis across the developed world.
It's so expensive.
It is, and it is not just an American problem. Look at Germany. Germany is generally lauded for having strong social safety nets and affordable care. Yet currently, Germany is lacking over 300,000 nursery spots for children under 3 years old.
300,000 spots missing.
The physical infrastructure of care simply does not exist. Women cannot find or financially justify the care necessary to maintain demanding, inflexible corporate roles.
And the second driver.
A rapid political and cultural shift regarding corporate policy. In response to shifting federal political winds in America, corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs are being rapidly dismantled.
Which means the support structures are vanishing.
Exactly. The mentorship programs, the targeted recruitment, the structural supports that were intentionally built over the last decade to advance women in the workplace, they are being systematically removed by nervous HR departments.
And you can see the psychological toll of this in the survey data.
Yeah.
McKinsey and Lean In conduct an annual survey tracking employees' interest in climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
For men, the desire to be promoted to management has actually risen to nearly 90%. But for women, that interest has completely flatlined. For entry-level women, the desire to reach the C-suite is down to 69%. They are looking up at the ladder, looking at the collapse of childcare, looking at the removal of institutional support, and they are making a highly rational decision to just actively opt out.
It's a very sobering reality check on the fragility of social progress.
It is. It really is. But to balance the scales of our demographic discussion, our sources provided a piece of economic data that is incredibly optimistic, like almost sci-fi levels of optimism.
But I love this part.
And it has to do with the most terrifying demographic trend of all, the rapid aging of global society.
The conventional wisdom, the dystopian vision of the year 2100 that economists have warned about for decades, is that a rapidly shrinking working-age population will be totally crushed by the astronomical healthcare taxes required to care for a massive elderly population.
Right, the idea that every young worker will be taxed at 70% just to pay for the pills, the hospital beds, and the nursing homes of the boomer generation.
Exactly. But the data says this assumption might be completely wrong.
Okay, why? Tell me some good news.
It comes down to curing a famous economic concept called William Baumol's cost disease.
Cost disease.
Back in the 1960s, Baumol noted a fundamental divergence in the economy. Technologically intensive fields like manufacturing get cheaper and more productive over time.
Sure, you invent a better machine, you can make 10 times as many cars with the same number of workers. Prices go down.
Exactly. Makes sense. But labor-intensive fields like healthcare or education do not get more productive.
Because it's human to human.
Right.
Yeah.
Baumol's famous analogy was a string quartet. It takes 4 musicians exactly 45 minutes to play a Schubert piece today, just as it did in the 1800s. There is zero efficiency gain.
Right.
Yet you have to pay those musicians vastly higher salaries today just to keep them from quitting and taking high-paying jobs in the tech sector.
So because a doctor's physical examination will always take 15 minutes and a nurse can only change one bedpan at a time, the assumption was that healthcare costs will just rise endlessly, basically consuming our entire GDP.
Exactly, but that 200-year-old rule is finally breaking. Between 2011 and 2024, hospital costs only rose 0.5% above baseline inflation.
Wait, really? Just 0.5%?
Yes. Technology, specifically advanced robotics, AI diagnostics, and remote monitoring, is finally making healthcare genuinely cheaper to provide.
So we are replacing the musicians in the string quartet with a synthesizer.
Basically, yeah.
It's like, for decades, economists have been terrified of this monster hiding under the bed, waiting to eat the global economy as we age. And we finally look under the bed, and the monster is actually just an incredibly efficient Roomba, quietly cleaning the floor and saving us money.
I absolutely love that visualization. And there is a vital, deeply human element to this data as well. It's a concept called the compression of morbidity.
Compression of morbidity, what does that actually mean?
It means that medical advances aren't just keeping us alive longer in a prolonged state of sickness and decline. They are actually keeping us healthier for a longer proportion of our lives.
Well, that's amazing.
The data shows that Americans have gained 2.4 years of total life expectancy at age 66. And the crucial part, all of those extra 2.4 years are spent in good health.
That is genuinely beautiful. That's real quality of life.
It changes the entire economic equation. The amount of time an average person spends in severe mental or physical distress at the end of life is actually declining.
Which saves money.
Vastly less money is spent on extremely pricey residential nursing care. Furthermore, macroeconomic research shows that countries and municipalities with rapidly declining birth rates are actually adopting labor-saving automation much faster.
Out of sheer necessity.
Right. The workers of the future might be incredibly productive because they are heavily augmented by AI. An aging society might not bankrupt us at all.
I love that. It totally flips the script on the doom and gloom narrative. And that brings us perfectly to our final segment today, defying expectations.
Here's some good ones.
We're going to look at 3 quick, highly specific examples from the reporting where the conventional wisdom is just dead wrong, proving that we have to look much closer at the world around us. Let's start with the European stock market.
There is a massive overused cliche in finance. The stock market is not the economy.
We've all heard it.
But in Europe right now, it is shockingly, paradoxically true.
Yeah, because the economic vibes in Europe are terrible right now. The euro area GDP growth is a dismal 1.1%. The economy feels entirely stagnant.
It does.
They don't have these trillion-dollar AI giants. They are heavily regulated. And as we discussed earlier, they are terrified of freezing this winter. By all macroeconomic logic, investors should be fleeing European stocks. Yet European equities are actually considered a massive steal for investors right now.
Yeah.
How does the math on that work?
You have to look at where those companies actually generate their revenue. 60% of the total revenue for European index companies comes from outside Europe. When you buy a European index fund, you aren't really investing in the stagnant European domestic economy. You are investing in massive, highly efficient global companies that just happen to be headquartered in Paris or Frankfurt.
Okay, so they are globally diversified. But why are they projected to grow so fast?
Because of the composition of the European market, the U.S. market is utterly dominated by tech and software.
Right.
But Europe's market is incredibly heavy on real assets, commodities, heavy energy, legacy banks, and luxury goods.
Things people always need.
Exactly. In a macroeconomic environment characterized by sticky global inflation and supply chain crises like the Hormuz closure, those real asset companies thrive.
Banks make money on higher interest margins.
Yes. Energy companies make windfalls on tight supply. Analysts are currently expecting a staggering 17% EPS earnings per share growth for European stocks in 2026.
Which means the profits divided by the number of outstanding shares is surging, making the stocks highly valuable despite the local economy flatlining.
Okay.
Expectation shattered.
What's the second one?
Here's the second one. Chinese manufacturing. We are incredibly conditioned to the trope of made in China, equating to cheap, low-quality, knockoff consumer goods.
Right.
But look at the 2026 Tour de France.
Yes, this is a great example. For a very long time, China was the silent partner in global cycling. They manufactured the raw carbon fiber frames for elite Western bike brands like Trek or Specialized, but their own domestic brands were totally dismissed as cheap imitations.
But at the 2026 Tour de France, Chinese bikes from domestic brands like Xloud and Pardue are actively competing at the highest, most elite level of the sport.
We're talking about machines where a fraction of an ounce or a slight aerodynamic flaw is literally the difference between winning and losing.
It's peak engineering.
And the kicker is they're offering that world tour level engineering and performance to global consumers for 40% less than the legacy Western incumbents.
Wow, 40% cheaper for the same elite quality.
It is a perfect microcosm of a broader trend. China is aggressively moving up the global value chain. They are transitioning from offering cheap, unskilled labor to offering premium, elite engineering that directly undercuts Western dominance.
Which brings us to our final point. In a world inundated with all this complex, contradictory information, trillion-dollar AI mega-mergers, shifting demographics, global supply chain threats, how do you actually navigate it? How do you separate the signal from the noise?
It's a tough environment to parse.
It is.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. You navigate it by fundamentally changing the way you ask questions.
Yes. There is some fascinating new psychological and economic research on the dynamics of asking questions in professional settings. And it identifies a highly toxic habit called boomer asking.
Boomer asking. I read this and instantly knew exactly what it was.
We all know someone who does it.
It's when you ask someone a question entirely just so you can pivot and tell your own story. Like you're at a networking event and someone says, "Hey, do you have any fun summer vacations planned?" Just so they can immediately follow up your answer with, "Oh, that's nice. Well, I'm actually going on a highly exclusive spiritual retreat to Bhutan."
Precisely. It is entirely performative. It signals to your colleagues or your clients that you are insincere and utterly uninterested in actual information gathering.
Yeah.
But the research didn't just highlight bad habits. They actually utilized an AI to analyze transcripts of thousands of corporate earnings calls to determine what kinds of questions actually generate value.
And by value, we mean questions that reveal hidden information and actually move a company's share price.
Yes. The AI found that the questions that uncover real hidden value are what researchers term curveball questions.
Let's define that for the listener. A curveball question means it is highly, intricately relevant to the core business, so the CEO can't just dodge it with a platitude. But it is framed from a completely unpredictable angle, so the corporate PR team hasn't prepared a canned, sterilized answer in a binder.
Exactly. And the data on who asks these curveball questions is the best part.
Who asks them?
It is almost never the mid-level analysts. It is usually the absolute industry star veterans who possess decades of deep structural expertise.
Because they know exactly where to look.
Right. Or, conversely, it is complete novices, people entirely new to the sector who aren't bogged down by the accepted conventional wisdom of the room, so they just ask the obvious question everyone else was too embarrassed to ask.
They're the ones who shatter the assumptions.
Always.
Okay, let's bring this all home. We have covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive today.
We really have.
We started by mapping the sheer scale of the trillion-dollar AI corporate Leviathans, looking at how they are reshaping governance, dominating the bond markets, and redefining what a corporate entity even is.
We crossed the Pacific to look at China's massive state-directed gamble to hotwire their way to semiconductor dominance through sheer force of will and really clever software.
We examined the physical reality checks. We saw how a theoretical AI memory shortage in Taiwan can cripple a physical Xbox release in Ohio, and how geopolitical choke points in the Middle East could send European heating bills exponential overnight.
And we saw the shifting human landscape, the World Bank redefining development, and working women facing structural childcare deficits.
But we also found incredible data-driven optimism, proving that our aging society might actually be healthier and vastly more productive than economists ever dreamed. We found hidden investment value in sluggish Europe, elite engineering in Chinese bicycles, and the immense measurable power of asking a curveball question.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over as we wrap up today.
Let's hear it.
Throughout this entire synthesis of the global economy, we have seen how a relentless pursuit of scale and efficiency dictates everything.
Everything.
The $800 billion AI data centers, the World Bank shifting its metrics to maximize immediate poverty relief per dollar, the precise carbon fiber weave of a Chinese bicycle designed to shave off a fraction of a second.
It's all about ruthlessly optimizing the machine.
But if the ultimate curveball question is about what we miss when we only focus on scale, it begs a critical question.
Which is?
Are we building a deeply, flawlessly efficient global machine at the direct expense of human resilience? Because efficiency removes buffers. What happens when this perfectly optimized, tightly wound machine encounters a sudden shock it simply cannot compute?
When the tectonic plates finally snap and the map changes overnight, are we resilient enough to survive the earthquake? It's something to think about.
It really is.
Thank you so much for pulling up a chair and joining us on this deep dive today. Keep looking closely at the world around you. Don't blindly trust the conventional wisdom, and keep asking those curveball questions in your own life. I'll catch you next time.